This is not the big song and dance that I've done in previous years. This is going to be an interactive demonstration of a couple of things. Interactive for me, not so much for those of you watching. The first half of my session, I will be talking about, not PowerPoint, that's a hangover from something I typed on my own keyboard earlier. I want to talk a little bit about extended multi-line input in the session. Before I get into that, I want to just go back to some session behaviors that have been in Dyalog' APL for as long as there has been a Dyalog' APL, I should imagine. For example, if I have a number of expressions in my session, so 2 plus 2, 3 plus 3, 4 plus 4, 4 plus 4, as I go up through my session log, if I modify a line by perhaps just adding a space to the end of it, I've modified 2 lines here. If I hit enter, those 2 lines come down to the bottom of the session and are re-executed. That's something that we'll come back to in a moment. Something else that has been in Dyalog' APL for a long, long time is this thing called a line editor, or you may know it as a del editor. And this allows me to enter multiple lines of text into the session and define a function. So I might do something like this. When I put in a closing del, then we come out of this editor, and I now have this function called.
John, can you increase the font size a little bit?
I can, if I could just get to the button. Hold on. How's that? It's probably not going to affect me too much, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I can do things like this. Now, so this line editor is a good way of inputting a function line after another into the session. It's especially useful if you have maybe the definition of a function in text somewhere, and you can then paste that into the session. Okay, hit enter, and then we end up with this thing called tfun in our workspace. Now, let me go through that again. We'll see here that there was a syntax error because I've got a colon trap 0, but my colon end is an end if, not an end trap. And unfortunately, in this model, in this usage, we don't get any syntax coloring that tells us we've got that wrong. We'll come back to that later. I can, of course, modify this function later by going into the line editor, and it shows me the entire body of the function. I can go up and I can edit that trap, but we have no syntax coloring. If I hit enter here, then the same with the 2 plus 2 and the 3 plus 3, the line 14 comes down, but now my function looks a little bit odd. It's got 2 line 14s in it. I can fix that by various incantations in the line editor. Square bracket, quad square bracket gives me the entire body of the function contiguously. But it's a little bit clunky, but it does the job. If we come over to version 18, which is the session that I have on the left, and I go into options configure and enable extended multi-line input, and this is also something that can be set in the registry with a registry setting or externally with an environment variable. Things now behave a little bit differently. If I type these lines that I typed before, if I now go up a few lines and modify these, we now get a little indication in the left-hand column to tell us that those are the lines that are going to be re-executed when we come down into the session. So that's a useful little tweak that we have in that left-hand column. Something else that's important with this extended multi-line input on is if I take this text that I had before and paste this into the session, okay, we can see that we have now much better syntax coloring information. Our trap, our else, and our end if are all colored red because there is something wrong with our keyword matching. And we can also see that we've got red dots all the way down the left-hand line of the session, indicating that these are the lines that are going to be executed. So if I now hit enter on this, okay, we have essentially used the line editor to fix that function. And you can also see that we have a new indication at the leftmost column of the session, in some way indicating that these are a group of lines. Now, the fact that these are a group of lines is important, because what this means with this extended mode of multi-line input into the session is that I can go up and just edit one of these lines in place in the session. Okay, so we can see as I complete my end trap, all of the syntax coloring gets fixed up. Okay, so we get the hint even now interactively in the session that we had something wrong in our function. When I hit enter now, on the right hand side in 17.1, we just brought the one line down to the bottom, the colon end trap. But now with the extended multi-line feature, what happens is everything comes down and our trad fun gets fixed in one shot. And we can keep going back. We can fix the misspelling on line 2 and refix our function, rerun the thing. And it's a much more interactive, intuitive way of editing these trad funs inside the session. If we wanted to add a new line, we could do that earlier with lots of incantations, but now I just have a keystroke that says insert a new line after the current line, and I can now do stuff in here. New line. When I come out of the line editor, it doesn't execute the function, it just fixes the function in the workspace so that it's available to us and we can run it with all of our modifications. So the extended multi-line input improves the behavior of the traditional line editor or del editor, depending on what you might want to call it. Of course, there's many ways in Dyalog' APL of defining functions. We might also have a defun, okay, something that looks like this. If we try and paste this into 17.1, we actually get a syntax error because we've got the unmatched brace on the line that we've input. We can get around this by putting a del at the front and using the line editor, but then we get into all of the mechanics of trying to understand how the line editor works. If we come over to version 18 and paste this text in, okay, we can see again we have all the red dots down the left-hand side to say these are the lines that have been input. But now, when we hit enter, no syntax error, this is just fixed, and we can run the defun with an argument. And in fact, we could start a new defun just by typing this into the session. We get the indication on the left that there is a group of lines here, and we can complete our defun and run it as normal. If we wanted to extend or change how we'd implemented this, we can just go up, modify that one line, hit enter again, and run the function a second time. So the extended multi-line input allows us to define defuns in a very similar way to how we were defining trad funs earlier. Trad funs are introduced with a leading del, as they always were, and defuns are introduced with a leading brace. In fact, we don't even need to specify the name of our defun. If we just start with the open brace, we're in the same mode, and we can write our defun until we complete it, perhaps give it an argument, and everything works just as if we typed that, well, I mean, we have just literally typed that multi-line defun into the session. So this whole process of experimenting with multiple lines to define a function are much simpler with the multi-line edit, with the new multi-line stuff, which is labeled as experimental in version 18. But everything that I'm showing you here, this is a version 18 interpreter as per the latest DSS releases that I'm showing you on the left. And you can do this on your own if you enable that extended multi-line option. What's going on here is, broadly speaking, the interpreter is detecting a syntax error because of an unmatched entity. When it detects such an entity, it enters this multi-line input mode, which it remains in until it detects that that syntactically unmatched element is completed, and then it carries on. Okay. But there are many other different types of syntactic elements in the interpreter. I'll say many. There are other syntactic elements in the interpreter that might be unmatched. For example, we might want to type of control structure into the session. So now we can say, if one, we enter the same mode that we've been in before, quad gets it's one. And if. One can never type when people are watching. I'll try and pretend that you're not. We can go up and modify this and run this again. Okay, we've got a syntax coloring issue there, but let's not worry too much about that. We could do trap expressions in the session. Okay, so I've mistyped message, but we see that we got into the into that part of the trap. And as I showed with the trad funds and with the defunds, I can just fix this one line of code, re-execute everything, and fix my space. So this is a much more intuitive way of working with multiple lines of input into the session without the overhead of going into the editor, editing something, fixing it, running it from the session, going back to the editor, running it, editing it, fixing it again. And of course, I can copy all of these lines. When I select these lines, you'll notice that the characters on the left that are used for the grouping are not copied. So I can paste this into my new function, just like that. Once I've developed my code interactively in the session, and everything works in a much more intuitive way than it did before. We're not just restricted to control structures or defunds. We can do other things. We can do colon namespace. So let's create a namespace. We'll call it JD. Inside JD, we'll have a function. Let's say hello, and we'll do quad gets hello from JD. And the function and the namespace. We can run JD.hello. Or we could do a class definition in here. And we can have a function, we can write a function which is our implements constructor. Sorry, let me get this right. Implements constructor. Constructor, and I think it needs to be public, and we can end our function and our class. Okay, and now we can do quad new JD class. We trace into this, and we are just editing a namespace, sorry, a class exactly as if we'd done paren ed. Class like that and built the thing up this way, but we're able to do it interactively in the session in the same way that we have been working on other multi-line expressions in the session, like defunds, trad funds, control structures, namespaces, and all of those things. So all of that is a convenient way of entering multiple lines of text into the session. Okay, so why are we doing this? Well, first of all, it's very useful to be able to do this when one is developing code. Okay, but another reason for wanting to do this is to get us somewhere closer towards a way of writing APL that could be used as a scripting language for other environments. And by scripting languages in this context, I mean something like a batch file in a Windows command shell, or a bash file in, well, in a bash shell, or maybe PowerShell script in PowerShell. For example, here I've got a, let's go to, let me look at my notes, where am I supposed to be first? Right, so here I am in a command batch file, sorry, a command script, a command shell. So I have got a file called here's a batch file that asks me for my name and says hello to me. Okay, so if I run scripts hello.bat, it says enter my name, enter your name, I'll type my name, it says hello John, this is CMD. Okay, that's a batch file. Or we might, I think I can do this. Let's try the scripts / hello.vbs. Here is a VB script script file. So I can run hello.vbs from my terminal, and Visual Basic prompts me by default with GUI to say hello. It tells me it's from VBS script. If we want to write VB script that accesses the console directly, it's a little bit more complicated, but here is a console version of the hello VB script thing. And here we just have VB script in a file, and we can run this thing. And again, enter my name, hello John, this is VB script, excludes the missing spaces. Other shells exist, of course, in PowerShell. Inside scripts, we've got hello.ps1, which is a PowerShell script, which does exactly the same thing. And there is the content of that. Now, all of these things are great as long as you know the language that you've got in your shell script. Wouldn't it be nice if, oh no, there's one other environment I need to talk about first of all. This is on my Windows machine. This is a Cygwin shell. So this looks very much like a Unix shell. Now on Unix, we have a lovely little editor called VI, which is what I like to use a lot, but we also have hello.bash. If I run hello.bash, it does exactly what everything else did. Okay, if we VI hello.bash, okay, it's got bash syntax in it, okay, but it's also got this interesting line at the top, #bang bin/bash. And on a Unix system, this line at the top of the file basically tells the process that runs this what language all of this stuff is implemented in, or to be more precise, what program to use to interpret what's written under here. So if we were, for example, able to type APL up here, we'd be able to write APL code down here, and we'd have an APL script. Well, it should be no surprise that I have got hello.apl script, no, hello.dia script in here. Okay, we've got this #bang thing at the top that tells whatever's running this how to interpret the text underneath. And then we have some APL code. Quad gets enter your name. Name gets quote quad, read from standard input. Quad gets some output and some APL expressions. So now, in all of these platforms, I can run hello.dia script. Okay. Enter your name, my name is John. Hello John, this is APL. Now this is my bash shell, and that has worked because the bash shell has said, oh, I know that that exists, I will use that to interpret the contents of this script. We can run the same thing in our command shell, but this time on Windows, system is using the file extension to determine how to run this thing. But the behavior is still the same. And in the back, in PowerShell, we can do the same thing. Behavior is slightly different here for reasons that I haven't yet figured out. But what happens is this splits up a separate command shell window into which we type we interact with the program, but you may have seen it quickly there, it's flashed up, this is APL. So one of the advantages of extending what we can type into the session means that that gives us a much richer content that we can type into these Diascript files. For example, here, I've got a thing called dis.diascript. Okay, this has got some more complicated APL code in it. Okay, it retrieves all of the arguments that were given to our script, worries about whether they were UTF-16 or UTF-8 encoded, depending on what terminal we were in. Don't worry about, that'll go away. But this isn't an APL function because this has got a paren x load in it, which we wouldn't be allowed to have in an APL function. Okay, but because this is stuff that's all treated as if it were multi-line input into the session, as I demonstrated earlier, then this stuff just gets fed into the session and executed. So we can do an X load. We can then have an inline if else end if control structure, and we can just run this as we've run everything else just from within our interactive shell. If I give it no arguments, then we go through the case where 0 does match the shape of the expression. Oh no, sorry, that's a not equal. So we come through this case because I've not typed anything. But if I type in an APL expression here, then the script will just, oh, I still have the VI on the front there, that's what happened. Then, oh, and I need to tell it where it is. But now we get all of that code that was in the Diascript file is executed interactively without us needing to start an interpreter or worry about what's installed or worry about translate tables and so on. This notion of the hash bang, of course, let's look at this again, is good because this is something that's portable across Linux, OS X, Raspberry Pi, and so on. So if we move over to a Linux machine, which I can do by just changing my virtual desktop, hopefully now, and I'd appreciate some feedback on this, hopefully everyone can now see a Linux desktop. Can I just get a nod from someone to say that's the case?
Yes, we can see it. In general, your font size is a bit low. As a general comment.
Yes, okay, and okay, well, I can change this one as well, I think. Just bear with me.
And you have 5 minutes left of the first half.
Yes, thank you. What are we doing? What are we doing? Text appearance. Custom font, this is what we want. Let's just make this somewhat larger. Okay. Okay, so that's certainly large enough. But now we can run the same things on here. We can run the hello Diascript file here, enter your name, John, and it just works exactly as it did before. We can do dis.diascript. Okay, and give it an expression. And the APL code that was in the hash bang file is fed into the interpreter as if it was this multi-line, extended multi-line input, and it just runs it as if we typed it into the session. One more machine, let's come over to our Mac machine, another virtual desktop. Actually, to be fair, this is the only real desktop of the presentation. And let's see if I can change the text size here. Bear with me. Let's go big. And let's see. I'm not going to change that. That hasn't changed that. But if I start another one. Right, so here's another one. CD scripts. And the same stuff just works here. So it just works. And this is all just running APL code. It's not in a workspace. It's not in something that looks like a file. It's something that looks like the sort of text that you can now just conveniently type into the session. I mean, in fact, I could paste this. Okay. Now, if I took my line numbers off, I could cut and paste this into my session, and assuming that my command line arguments in the interpreter were correct, this would all just work. So that's why, one of the reasons why, or rather that's the other reason why we wanted to extend the multi-line input, so that this hashbang scripting was going to make a lot more sense. All because we can type more interesting things into the session here. So that's basically the demonstration of that. I've just got a few notes that I made of ideas that have come up since I first demonstrated this. One of the key issues that Morten alluded to earlier was it would be nice if we were able to debug things like this via RIDE, and we're doing a lot of work on that in the 19 framework, so that RIDE can be attached to these things that are running scripts in such a way that, for example, when this is asking for input at this point, when I type in John, as someone debugging this, I can decide whether the input should come from my attached RIDE session or whether my input should come from the terminal that I'm connected to here. And also, of course, any output, whether it should go to the terminal or whether it should go to the connected RIDE session. Something else that I should point out at this point is there's nothing to stop me creating GUI in here. I could create a message box in this script, and it would then pop up on my screen for anything that, you know, on an operating system that supported whatever GUI I chose to use. And there's various questions about, you know, wouldn't it be nice if I had a keystroke that reformatted and removed any extraneous space in my functions and my class definitions as I was in the session and so on. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a key that automatically took this text and put it into an editor so that I didn't have to do the selection and paste it into an editor and so on. But hopefully there's enough there for you to get the idea. Extended multi-line input into the session so that we can define control structures in one piece. We can define trad funds and defunds interactively. We can execute an unnamed defund interactively in the session. And this then leads us nicely onto the idea of these hashbang script files, which can be implemented in any number of languages: Batch script, Bash, VB script, PowerShell. I'm sure you could do it in Python and other languages as well. But now this allows us to include APL as in the list of languages where we can do hashbang scripting. That's that. Are there any questions pending? Morten, I'll let you jump in.
Would you like me to read you a couple of questions?
Well, yes, because it's only my own time I'm digging into.
Yeah, so Kai Jaeger asks, are fix events issued for Link and Acre and tools like that?
I mean, that's a good question. No, they're not. They weren't with the line editor either, because they're very much a function of the editor, but it's a good question, something that we should probably look into.
Okay. Russell Dillon asks, are these features implemented as a language server protocol so they could be used by other editor environments?
Well, okay, so that was something that one of the reasons why this is currently marked as experimental is that at the moment RIDE doesn't support it. And I would imagine that once RIDE supports it, I don't know if Gil's available on the chat or anyone who knows how RIDE works, but once RIDE is aware of these new behaviors of the session, then it will be aware of it, which means that any other external IDE that knows about the RIDE protocol will be aware of it. And I guess that includes the things suggested in the question.
Yeah, so maybe we could talk more about that in the open session at the end.
Sure.
One more question perhaps before you move on is there a couple of people who've asked about whether you can pipe, you know, the output of one of these commands into another command and so on.
Okay, so yes, right. So here's an interesting thing. So, and it's only my own time I'm wasting, so we can do that, and it's not a waste of time. So I can do this, and it says enter your name, John. Okay. What I can do is I can echo John into this. Doesn't prompt me for input, it just digs it out from study. Okay, I can then pipe this into WC, Unix shell, word count, not WC cranks and GUI. So that then tells me that there were 43 characters, 8 words and 2 lines. I think that's what it's telling me. So, yes.
A couple of other questions, but I suggest you move on and we...
Yes, I'll move on, and depending on how long this next section takes, we can maybe take questions for both parts afterwards.